The movie opens on a flight bound for Novosibirsk, Russia, where a mother and her 7-year-old daughter, Katia, are traveling together. Mid-flight, Katia wakes up to find her mother missing from her seat. Just then, an announcement warns of an emergency landing as the plane begins to shake. In terror, Katia notices an eerie old woman behind her, murmuring unintelligible words. Overwhelmed, Katia faints just as the engines explode, sending the plane crashing. Miraculously, she survives, limping alone through the dense forest with a squeaky leg brace. 20 years later, Katia is now a psychologist, using her own journey with trauma to help others. A group of reporters approaches her for an interview, hoping to revisit the tragedy on its 20th anniversary. Reluctantly, she agrees, bringing along her own daughter, 7-year-old Diana. During the interview, Diana mentions that the sound of a leg brace still seems to haunt her mother. Katia explains she's moved past her fear of flying, and soon, they plan to visit Diana's grandfather. On a stormy evening, Katia and Diana board a nearly empty flight, as many passengers have canceled due to the weather. Diana asks to sit in the back, but Katia insists on staying in their assigned seats. They're soon introduced to Alexei, a kind stranger seated nearby who notices Katia's nervousness and reassures her that everything will be fine. Shortly after takeoff, Katia notices a commotion a few rows back. An elderly woman named Galina is in a full-blown panic attack due to her intense fear of flying. Katia, relying on her psychology skills, rushes to her aid, calmly talking Galina through her fears and offering her some stress relief pills. Meanwhile, in the front of the plane, a businessman named Nikolai badgers a brooding young artist seated across from him, questioning what he's sketching. The artist gives only a cryptic reply, saying that drawing helps him see. As the plane begins to ascend, Katia hears a metallic squeak overhead, instantly triggering her. She hurriedly retreats to the lavatory, barely dodging the rebuke of a stern stewardess who insists she should be seated. Once inside, she takes a calming pill, but then hears her mother's voice calling her. Looking around, she finds that the lavatory door has transformed. When she opens it, she's no longer on the plane but instead standing in her childhood home. Confused and shaken, Katia wanders until she finds another door, which, upon opening, returns her to the airplane. She's startled to find the emergency exit blocked and is promptly scolded by the same stern stewardess, who directs her back to her seat. Back at her seat, Alexei notices Katia's distress and gently asks if she's okay. Before Katia can respond, her daughter Diana explains that her mother survived a deadly plane crash as a child. Alexei offers his condolences, and the two eventually strike up a conversation. Alexei reveals he's a seasoned war correspondent, which leads Katia to open up slightly. As the plane reaches cruising altitude, passengers settle into sleep. But later that night, as the plane encounters turbulence, strange phenomena begin. The night sky turns an eerie red, and ghostly handprints appear on the windows, creating a haunting atmosphere. Katia is thrust into another vision. She's back in her childhood home, having dinner with her mother. Young Katia asks if the scar on her leg will ever heal, and her mother responds tenderly, though her reflection in the mirror is grotesquely distorted. Katia's mother then becomes evasive when Katia asks if she really survived the crash, insisting that it's been 3 months since the flight. The dream spirals into a nightmare as Katia's mother starts contorting unnaturally. Suddenly, Katia is jolted awake by the plane's violent turbulence. The rest of the passengers, including Galina, are also startled. Galina's husband, Yevgeny, collapses and loses consciousness, causing panic among the passengers and crew. Katia, maintaining her composure, takes control, instructing them on how to care for Yevgeny until help arrives. As Katia performs CPR on Yevgeny, he suddenly grabs her, muttering strange words before collapsing again. Severe turbulence then shakes the plane, forcing everyone to strap in. Katia sees a shadowy hand behind Alexei's seat, but it vanishes as soon as Yevgeny takes his last breath. The turbulence grows worse, and a stewardess is thrown into the ceiling while trying to deliver an oxygen tank, which Katia watches helplessly. Losing consciousness from lack of oxygen, Katia remembers an old woman chanting on her childhood flight before she wakes up. The turbulence now stopped. Reassuring Diana, she tells Alexei about the old woman from the crash and suspects she's behind all this. But Alexei dismisses it as a hallucination. Diana shows Katia a drawing of them in the plane's back row, though Katia insists it's not their seat. Later, Katia recalls hearing her mother's voice before takeoff and wonders if it was a warning. Nearby, Nikolai, a businessman, chats with a hipster showing photos of his family, while the hipster sketches a picture of him smoking. Katia notes her leg scar is gone and worries that they haven't heard from the captain since Yevgeny's death. Suddenly, Alexei clutches his head, while Diana speaks to an imaginary girl who warns her, "Mommy will leave as soon as a man starts blazing." Finally, an announcement declares they're diverting to Novosibirsk, the city Katia and her mother were flying to 20 years ago. Katia starts noticing strange behavior in the attendant, whose icy demeanor seems off. Then, she spots a leak under the businessman's seat from an oxygen tank, while liquid drips from the ceiling above him. Meanwhile, Diana tells Katia again that the girl warned she'd leave her soon. The businessman, frustrated, tries to light a cigarette. Katia rushes over, but it's too late. The man catches fire as the lighter ignites the leaking oxygen. Strangely, Katia sees a face screaming within the flames before the attendants douse it. The man survives but is horribly burned. Katia rushes back to Diana, only to spot the shadowy figure once more. Suddenly, Katia finds herself back at home with Diana. A day before the flight, her leg scar restored. She embraces Diana, deciding to cancel their trip, which Diana happily agrees to. That night, Katia dumps her meds down the toilet, but then hears her daughter's voice, though she's nowhere to be found. The house shakes as Diana's voice angrily accuses Katia of abandoning her. In an instant, she's back on the plane, and Galina rouses her. Diana runs up, upset that Katia ignored her earlier. Alexei interrupts, asking Katia to assist the burned man. As she treats him, she tells Alexei she's struggling to distinguish her hallucinations from reality. Nearby, the brooding hipster, Pavel, mutters to himself while sketching, which grates on Katia's nerves. She yells at him, but Alexei intervenes. Later, Pavel assists Nikolai, who reaches for his phone and gazes at a family photo before he passes away. Saddened by his death, Katia apologizes to Pavel for snapping at him, and they exchange names, forging an unlikely bond amid the chaos. Katia becomes worried when she notices Galina has been in the lavatory for a long time. She bangs on the door, drawing annoyed glances from the stewardesses, who think she's causing trouble. When they open the door, Galina isn't inside. Meanwhile, Yevgeny's lifeless body mysteriously opens its eyes. As Katia starts to return to her seat, Yevgeny suddenly shoves her, sending her into the seats behind, where shadowy hands seem to grip her. She snaps back to reality, finding Yevgeny's body motionless but sensing a dark figure nearby. She rushes to Diana, insisting they need to leave the plane. Alexei tries to calm her, but suddenly he begins bleeding from his eye and collapses. The stewardesses rush to help, trying to restrain Katia, when one starts vomiting water and collapses. Horrified, Katia accuses the stern stewardess of hiding something, then grabs Pavel's sketchbook. Flipping through, she sees her visions drawn in detail, just as Pavel vanishes. Still, Alexei and the stern stewardess try to keep her from the pilot's door, claiming it's for her own safety. Suddenly, an invisible force pulls the stewardess away, and Alexei dies from a head wound. Left with no choice, Katia bursts through the pilot's door, only to find herself in an identical cabin. She pushes through door after door until she finally stumbles into a cabin that looks entirely different. In a shocking twist, Katia realizes Diana is no longer beside her, but instead stands at the end of the hall with a shadowy figure. She races toward her daughter, only for the story's reality to unravel. Katia has been dreaming, and she's still on the doomed flight from 20 years ago. The old woman, whom Katia had blamed for the crash, explains that she cast a spell to shield Katia from witnessing the horrors of death firsthand. All the visions Katia experienced were a glimpse of a future life she will never have. Despite Katia's attempts to wake up, the old woman releases her, leaving her fate in her own hands. Katia then sees the passengers from her dream, Galina, Yevgeny, and Alexei, as they actually are, with Yevgeny suffering a heart attack as Katia's mother tries to assist. In a final farewell, Katia's imaginary daughter, Diana, appears and urges her to follow the clues from her visions. When little Katia awakens, she's back in the terrifying moment of the crash. She crawls toward the back seats to reach her mother, witnessing the passengers' deaths one by one. Alexei helps Katia and her mother strap in, sacrificing himself to shield them. The film ends with young Katia and her mother as the crash's sole survivors, seated in row 19. The end.